Marvin Devine. I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
Hello, folks. Welcome back once again. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania. Listen, if you're in South Africa and you thought that the state needed expropriation without compensation to take all your money from you, well, you're sadly mistaken. They didn't need that. There's long been a measure in South Africa's law that allows the government to go through something known as asset forfeiture. And strangely enough, we have the same thing here in many states in the United States. Normally, it's used to seize the proceeds of suspected drug transactions. And if they do it to you, it usually is a bit of taint. But in this case, in South Africa, Dr. Dan Rodt is here today to talk to me today about the government doing exactly that. Now, listen to this very quickly before I welcome Dan. The government can take your assets without a court order, without even approaching the court. All they have to do is publish it in the government gazette, and they can take it. And they don't even have to explain why. Dr. Dan Rodt, welcome to the program. Goeiemorgen, or goeiedag, it's afternoon for you. And what have I gotten wrong there?
Yeah, it's goeiemiddag, you could say.
Okay.
But yes, yeah, you're exactly right. You know, it happened in our case. We had 4.2 million rand, which is about $250,000, and in the account of our non-profit, at a bank, and they just froze the money, and 3 years later they just forfeited it, and they didn't give any reasons whatsoever. To this day, I don't really know what I did wrong or didn't do wrong. And now I've got 90 days to take them to court, which is going to be quite a heavy process, because it happened to another friend of mine who's, he's an asset manager many years ago. Same thing happened to him. And he went to court and he won the first round in the High Court. But then the Reserve Bank appealed. And he said when he walked into the courtroom for the appeal, they had 19 senior advocates, like really high-powered lawyers in South Africa, standing in that courtroom against him. And he lost it on appeal, and then they also took his money. But it's been going, ever since this thing happened to me, it was published, when it was published in the government gazette, it got into the media and people became aware of it. And lots of people have been contacting me with the same problem. And one of the other YouTubers, a guy called Rian Roo, he had a look at those government gazettes and other editions, and within the same week or so, week to 10 days, the government, actually the Reserve Bank, confiscated 35 million rand from various companies and individuals. And then I got a letter from a missionary pastor in Mozambique. He's South African, he's an Afrikaner, but he works there doing missionary work, and he also builds churches. And he got $202,000 from a church in Texas. And the money went to his wife's account in South Africa at the same bank, the Absa Bank, where our money was seized. And they also froze that money. And it's no explanation whatsoever. It's now 18 months later. His lawyer has been writing emails to the Reserve Bank and so on. They just tell him, we're investigating you, period. There's no explanation given, nothing. And they've got this archaic regulation that goes back to, there's a law that goes back to the 1930s. And there are some other regulations that go back to 1960 that were put in place after the Sharpeville riots in March 1960. And the Reserve Bank still uses those regulations to actually, expropriate people's money. So they don't, I mean, to actually, people are worried about the farmland in South Africa, but it seems to me that cash is even more at risk than the average farm out there.
Well, Dan, this is what I've warned about for the past 6 years, ever since this nonsense was brought back into Parliament about the time that Ramaphosa took over from Zuma. First off, this expropriation without compensation doesn't respect private property rights, which makes South Africa ineligible for the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. They shouldn't be included in it, and they've been getting skating over for 6 years. But what I've warned people all along, because I've read what the expropriation without compensation clause in the Constitution, Section 25 says, and I'm aware of asset forfeiture rules, but I didn't know that South Africa was actually employing that. This doesn't get much attention. But what I've warned people is it's not about land. Land is a red herring. Yes, land is an issue that people are flying to get attention. But the reality is that expropriation without compensation, or asset forfeiture in this case, means any asset, whether it's movable or otherwise. It could be a retirement fund. It can be your jewelry. It can be your flat, your bucky. It can be your land. It can be your cash in the bank, bonds, anything that you own, gold, Krugerrands. Property is property, and they can seize that property. And in this case, they've done this. Now, before you respond to that, I just want to say that under Regulation 22B, which we're talking about here, they can freeze and confiscate any of your assets if they suspect a violation of foreign exchange regulations. They don't need a criminal conviction. Now, here's the thing. It's ironic that this is going on. I'm sure most of the audience is going to know where I'm going with this, but $580,000 laundered into South Africa and stuffed in furniture at Pala Pala. You would think that'd be something they'd want to seize, but apparently they're more interested in going after organizations that are nonprofits like your organization and yourself. This must be deeply troubling. And while $250,000 is a lot of money, once you start adding up lawyer fees, even if you're successful, you're going to eat through a lot of that money unless the costs are applied to them.
Yes, exactly. And you're referring there, of course, to the famous Pala Pala case where the president of the country actually contravened just about every rule in the book. You know, when he stuffed the 500 odd, what you were saying, $580,000 in cash in his couch. And that's, you know, nothing happened to him. But even worse for me is, you know, I don't know if you can remember they talk about state capture in South Africa. And around about 2016 or thereabouts, we had an Indian business family, they called themselves, the Guptas. And they, they were involved in all kinds of corruption with the ANC under the Zuma presidency. And in the end, people calculated that they actually embezzled about 50 billion rand from South Africa, which would be probably about $3 billion. And all of that money left the country via the banking system and went to Dubai and other tax havens. And neither the banks nor the Reserve Bank lifted a finger to stop that. And, you know, so they could just transfer wire $3 billion out of the country, the proceeds of all the illicit, corrupt deals with corrupt politicians. But in our case, where we had, you know, each and every one of our transactions was, was authorized by the commercial bank through which we dealt through ABSA. And they just kind of came along one day and just froze our account and took the money.
What's particularly frustrating and annoying about all this is that there were legitimate concerns about serious money laundering through criminal enterprises and terror networks, but this all predates 9/11. Since 9/11, the SWIFT banking system is solidly in place, has much better mechanisms for tracking, and there are a lot of requirements for this. For instance, if you have a currency trading account, you can't simply have a currency trading account. You've got to provide photo ID and other mechanisms to verify who you are before you can do that, and they do periodic checks on that just to make sure that you're not laundering money, even if you're just paying for your mortgage overseas. Say I had a property in the UK and I'm paying for my mortgage from here, they would query me on that, and they would do it periodically. It's fascinating to me that that kind of money that the Guptas were involved in, plus we know with the illicit cigarette trade and all the other corruption taking place in South Africa, that the Reserve Bank would spend its time going after small fry, It seems to me that there's either one of two things in play here, and I don't know if you've thought about this. You probably have. Either they're going for money that they don't really care, they're just going to take it because they're thieves, or a second reason is that this is an attempt to punish or penalize people who have run afoul of the government in some way. Have you and your organization run afoul or criticized the government in some way? Could this be an effort to silence your speech?
Yeah, I wouldn't exclude that because, we've been quite vocal about the language discrimination against the Afrikaans language in South Africa. And I remember many years ago, sort of in the 2000s, the Reserve Bank, there was sort of a bilingual sign on their building in Pretoria. They've got this high-rise black glass building in Pretoria, but they removed the Afrikaans, the Afrikaans sign from the building, and we've sent out some sort of media statement at the time. Now, I don't know if they noticed that or something like that, but generally speaking, I have a theory that this government actually wants to impoverish us. I mean, they're busy, first of all, they've got all these, we've got the most stringent DEI laws in the world, prohibiting people from actually working. If you're a white person or an Afrikaner, you're not allowed to have a job. I mean, a corporate job or government jobs are completely taboo for us, and even corporate jobs are restricted. And, even university study in certain disciplines is also restricted. So I think they're just out to impoverish us and taking your money is one way of turning you into a poor person. So that's their strategy.
Well, this is the argument that I'm making. It seems clearer and clearer to me that this is the case. They really have gone out of their way to create problems for people. As you just mentioned there, the Employment Equity Act amendment, which will limit the number of white males who can serve in middle or senior management in a private corporation, not even in government jobs. This is sick, to 4.2%, 4.3%. And then they claim that they don't have race-based laws. That law is based entirely on race. How do you make a law that says white men can only occupy this many jobs if it's not a race-based law? So the organization that you founded, that you're with, is called, I don't know how you pronounce it in Afrikaans, but in English we'd say Prague, P-R-A-G. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what the organization has done? You formed it, about 20 years ago?
Yes, exactly. It's 26 years ago already. In the year 2000, because at the time it was, there were certain court cases around the language issue in South Africa, and there was a big debate about that. And we founded this pro-Afrikaans action group specifically to advocate for Afrikaans language rights. And eventually, but because it's such a political issue in South Africa, it became a slightly more politicized. But we also published a whole lot of books. We had a publishing operation and some websites. At one point, our websites a few years ago got hacked as well, around about the same time as this thing started happening with the Reserve Bank. So it looks as if there's some sort of an action against us. And we participated in public debate in South Africa. We also had people contributing, donating money to us and so on. I think we set off a kind of quite a process in South Africa, and eventually very many of the other more establishment kind of organizations got to this issue as well. So there's now quite a structured sort of federation of organizations in South Africa looking at all of these issues. But I think we did raise some very pertinent issues at the time, and perhaps they've held that against us. I was also targeted by around about the Soccer World Cup in South Africa, when it was at 2010, by the Daily Show in New York. I mean, they came to South Africa and they did an interview with me, and they completely, they did such a dishonest job of editing it that they actually, they would ask me, do you live in Johannesburg? And I would say yes. And then half an hour later, they would ask me, are you a racist? And I would say no. And then they would actually take the yes from half an hour before and splice it into the question where they were asking me if I'm a racist. And apparently for them, that's kind of par for the course or something. They were allowed to do that. I mean, at the time, I didn't know too much about legal issues and libel and defamation and so on. But yeah, there's been almost an organized, I think there is an organized campaign against the Afrikaner people in South Africa, against our culture, our language, and our very existence, and our jobs, our assets, institutions, heritage. I mean, I went to a talk at we've got like the French and the Swedish and everybody else. We've got an academy, handing out literary prizes and looking after the Afrikaans language, setting the rules for it and so on. And I went to a talk not so long ago at the Academy in Pretoria, the Academy for Science and Art, it's called. And there was a woman there she visited 110 libraries and archives in South Africa. And she had some real horror stories to tell about how, either through neglect or actual, willful destruction, how they're actually just, destroying public collections of books and manuscripts and music scores and you name it. I mean, it's just completely horrific.
Well, it is, as I've described for several years, a cultural genocide, an attempt to wipe out the identity of a group of people because you oppose them. This is what the Spanish did to the Inca. The Inca, of course, were a massive empire that controlled 10 million people and were defeated by 168 Spaniards, shockingly, because they had horses and they had armor, and the Indians just had slings and arrows. And the Incas, they went around, and what they did, just like the Mayas, it's almost impossible to find the written Mayan language, which is made up of characters, kind of like hieroglyphics, and it took us centuries to decipher it because the Spanish priests considered them blasphemous and collected all of their tablets and broke them. And the same thing with the Incas. They destroyed their religion, and they destroyed all the records of things to the point where even their cities were enveloped by the jungle in the Andes. And that's how you wipe out a people, and you wipe out their history and their culture, is you go after things that are sacred to them, their language, their symbols, their heritage, their history. And the only way the Incas have survived in many respects as a culture to us today is that the Spanish made records of what they did. So it's always, of course, from their perspective. But also, eventually anthropologists found these things. But I mean, it would be a tragedy for us to have to rely 300 years in the future on anthropologists to discover who the Afrikaners were instead of who they are.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've also used that term cultural genocide because I really think that is what is going on in our country. And, there's another issue, of course, one of the statues. I read somewhere that 90% of all statues and monuments built in South Africa were built by Afrikaners, not by the government, but by the people themselves who collected money and donated money and held, who held fundraising events and so on to put up these statues. And those have actually been physically attacked, removed, burnt, it's in the most horrific ways by this government and some of its supporters. It's just, the term cultural genocide is very appropriate. I think, somebody should actually write a book about what's going on with statues as well in South Africa. At some of the, there was that famous, he's not exactly an Afrikaner, the Cecil John Rhodes, but he was a very rich Briton who got rich through the diamond mines and the gold mines in South Africa in the 19th century. And he donated a lot of money to Oxford University in the UK, but also to the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And there was a statue of him at the University of Cape Town. They attacked that statue with excrement and paint. And they also burnt books and paintings and whatever. it was something from Pol Pot's Cambodia or Mao Zedong's China, the Cultural Revolution, something like that. It's radical and destructive and extremist. And this is what we are dealing with in South Africa. And then the central bank comes along and they confiscate our money. They now actually, they've published new regulations where they want to confiscate people's crypto assets, all digital assets. Apparently, you're going to have to need the express permission of the central bank to hold crypto, to deal in crypto, and for each and every transaction will be monitored. And if you do it without, even if you transfer crypto to your private wallet, they're going to confiscate that because they consider that as being, a contravention of the exchange control regulations as well. So it seems that it's going to get worse because up to now, for cryptocurrencies have actually enabled, especially for small transactions and so on, it's enabled a lot of people to pay and send money cross-border between South Africa and the rest of the world. I mean, we've got such a kind of an extended diaspora of people in Australia, New Zealand, US, UK, Europe, living, all of us have kids abroad and so on. So obviously you've got to make little payments for birthdays and, payments here and there. And now the government is clamping down on that as well. They're going to actually, confiscate people's crypto. It's just insane.
Well, when you look at things disparate or at a distance and you don't connect the dots, it doesn't make any sense. But when you look a little closer, you start to see perhaps some sort of grand conspiracy or grand plan here, which to me is shocking. The ANC can't run a kindergarten creche effectively, let alone this. But one of the reasons they're probably so terrified of Starlink is because they lose control. Now they can control telecoms with terrestrial links and with undersea cables. They can do that. But with the satellite system that comes in is available, then they won't have any way to intercept your crypto because they'll have no control over that signal, no way to trace it, no way to follow it, no way to break into it. And blockchain will defeat them. So there are lots of things that come into play here. And I believe that's one of the reasons. Of course, Starlink doesn't want to give up 30% of its equity, and that's understandable. But it's funny because Amazon Web Services came into the country, and all they had to do was give $20 million to a fund to finance black IT companies, $20 million. And Starlink was offering, hundreds of millions of dollars to put internet all over the country at rural schools and throughout the country. So to me, there's a lot of things linked here. And what's fascinating to me is that there are people who should have their money looked at because there's clearly money laundering going on. And even though they've got off the Financial Action Task Force gray list for the moment, South Africa, in my view, should still be on it. It's still a haven for money laundering, for criminal syndicates, and for terror financing. And that's been going on for almost 3 decades. And it's something that needs to be looked more closely. You think the Reserve Bank would focus its time on going after actual criminals, unless, of course, maybe the supposition that we're kind of putting out there in the air is this is an effort to punish Afrikaners in particular.
Yes, I cannot agree with you more. I mean, they are definitely, there have been all these government commissions of inquiry, like the Zondo Commission, and they've got another one called the Madlonga Commission going on at the moment, and where there's real criminal activities going on, and on a very large scale, payments going on as well. And they're not looking at that. They're actually punishing the little guy, and and the small organization and small business, and taking their money away. It's just absolutely shocking.
Well, the government of South Africa already has pretty strict currency rules to begin with. I mean, you can only take, I think, for SARS, you can only take R1 million a year or something like that out. Or I'm not sure the exact amount, but it's not a lot of money you can take out of the country.
Yes, exactly. Well, they've actually, paradoxically, they've actually now doubled that amount. It used to be 1 million rand per year, but I think this year, during the government's budget speech, finance minister's budget speech, they actually doubled that money to 2 million rand per annum. But but it doesn't. But the irony is that despite this little bit of liberalization of the regime, they're actually coming after you, and at the moment they are, as far as asset forfeiture is concerned, it's worse than ever in the past. So, I mean, this is just almost like a smokescreen for them to, to tell the world, oh no, we're relaxing exchange control, but in the meantime, they're actually applying it in a far more draconian manner. And there are also some rules around that, because if you've got the capacity to transfer 2 million rand abroad, and you've got, okay, that's your limit, but maybe you've got 4 million rand in the bank, and you tell your son, okay, son, can you take 2 million for me out in your name, and I'll send 2 million rand out in mine. Then they're also going to confiscate your money, because you're not allowed to use even your family members' quota for transferring money abroad. So it's really an absurd system, and it's set up in such a way to trap you and to actually make it easy for them to come along, and then with their constant asset forfeitures.
Well, in the States, we have our own concerns about this sort of thing. The Internal Revenue Service has this ability, in my view, to do things which are unconstitutional. They can seize your assets and go after you, but they do have to get a court behind that. But we have, in states, many states have asset forfeiture laws, which are shocking, and many Americans don't even know about it. For instance, in Florida, I don't know if the law has changed, but the law was several years ago. A state trooper pulls you over, just to pull you over. I mean, maybe they had a turn signal that was out, or you didn't signal, or you're going a few miles over the speed limit. They could pull you over, and during a stop, they can ask you whether you've got assets on you, if they suspect, or they claim they suspect, that you have assets that are illicit, like from drug trafficking or something like that. And any cash you have on you, they can take. And they don't have to explain it. They never have to return it, whether you committed a crime or not. These asset forfeiture laws are unconstitutional, yet they exist in many states in America. And the intent is, I suppose, reasonable to prevent drug trafficking and money laundering. But the bottom line is that they often do this, and this is, and look, I'm not a person that runs around claiming, racism against Black Americans, but there's been a disproportionate number of cases of Black women in Florida being pulled over by the police and then their money taken. Like an incident a few years back of a woman who was going to visit her mother who lived in Georgia, and she had $1,200 that she took out of the bank because she had to go see her mother. She didn't have any credit cards, and she needed the money to stay up there. And, and the cop took her money, and she was destitute, had no money, couldn't even pay for petrol. I had to stop in the next town and call and beg for somebody to help her. It's this is an abuse by a state to do this. We are all entitled to due process, and you are entitled to due process, in my view. Regulation 22B is unconscionable, and its application is even worse. And in this case, it seems like it's intended to harm you because they've not given you a satisfactory answer. But you're far from alone. Now, the thing that I want to ask about, Dan, is that this didn't just happen, as I understand it. Now I understand it actually happened some time ago. They took the money, and it's just come light for the public. Is that correct?
That's more or less correct, although, the money was frozen almost 3 years ago in the bank account, right? And then there were some exchanges of emails and so on. And afterwards, nothing happened for a while. And then I sent some lawyers' letters and so on. But the thing is that after 3 years, if they haven't found a good reason to keep your money frozen, they have to give it back. And then they just came quickly with the asset forfeiture, and they published it in the government gazette. That's how it works, So we've been doing we've been in this crisis now for just about 3 years, but it only became public knowledge through the publication in the government gazette over the last few weeks. That's exactly what happened. But what's even more shocking about this regulation is that suppose you did a foreign exchange transaction of $50,000, and then they regard that as an illicit transaction or whatever. although all our transactions were legitimate and we had the necessary permission. I mean, each bank actually has an exchange control department that vets each and every transaction, as you probably know. But suppose they suspect something, that there's something wrong with that transaction. They can, and you've got another $1 million sitting in the bank. They can take the whole $1 million, not only any amount that was ever involved in a foreign exchange transactions. They can forfeit. They can declare an asset forfeiture over your entire, balance sheet, your entire estate. It's absolutely crazy. They talk about clean money and dirty money. They're not going to only take the so-called dirty money. They're going to take the clean money as well. I mean, and there's actually there are a few court cases about this stuff, but it's all so contradictory. I mean, the High Court in Johannesburg has contradicted itself now over the last year or so in 2 cases where 2 judges took diametrically opposite views of the situation, especially where crypto is concerned. But there's another case going on where, there was a big sort of a business fraud issue, accounting fraud issue around a company called Steinhoff and the CEO called Marcus Jooste. You must have read about that. But one of there's a thing, TEL or an estate called Lanzerac, and it was sold to another businessman, before all of this happened, and then along came the Reserve Bank, and they also declared that forfeited. So the guy paid something like 205 million rand. He legitimately bought it from, from this other company that was in trouble. And now the Reserve Bank has declared that forfeited to the state as well. So that case is going on, is before the courts at the moment. So how crazy is that? I mean, you can buy, a property from somebody else, and then along would come the Reserve Bank. You paid money for it. You took transfer of the property, and along comes the Reserve Bank, and they would declare it forfeited to the state. I mean, you hadn't done anything wrong whatsoever. You paid good money, your good money for that asset. It's insane.
It is absolutely insane, and yes, that I'm familiar with that case, and I'm very familiar with Steinhoff and Marcus Jooste, who purportedly took his life there on the beach. But
purportedly,
I said purportedly. I didn't say it. I said purportedly.
Yeah.
And I still have my Rugby Sevens Steinhoff sponsored jersey when they sponsored Blitzbach a while back. That actually broke when I was flying out to Las Vegas for the Rugby Sevens, and I was wearing that Steinhoff jersey the whole weekend for that Sevens tournament. Not to laugh, because a lot of people lost a lot of money in Steinhoff, but which of course the Germans have interest in that because it was a dual listed company, as I recall, and assets up there. So that's still unfolding now, but it's unfortunate for them. But it's crazy because the state abuses its position, whether it's this asset forfeiture without explanation, without a criminal charge, without proving money is illegitimate. They just take it and they can get away with it, and there's no recourse. That, or it's the effort to take someone's land even before expropriation without compensation by expropriating it and then being forced to give it back in the case of the Ackerland Broderei. And then they put pressure on the owners, and they have no choice but to sell it for a song, and they sell it to some Saudi prince, and it doesn't go back to any of the so-called historically disadvantaged people who never had it in the first place. The state is abusive in so many ways, and it's shocking that the public doesn't realize how they're being boxed in by their own state. It's really frustrating for me. I've been talking about all these issues for the past 6 years in the public domain, and of course behind closed doors in the classified world, the intelligence world, for many years prior to that. And the world just doesn't pay attention. South Africans, many are blissfully ignorant of the fact that today they may have earned wealth and savings and invested and built something up in nest eggs, and it can be taken in a heartbeat without any justification whatsoever by what I would consider to be dishonest or corrupt officials.
Yes, you're perfectly right. I realize now that how naive I was, and how dangerous it is to have a large amount of money in a bank account in South Africa. I'll never again in my life, if I ever have savings again, I wouldn't keep it in a bank account in South Africa. It's completely awful. But you're quite right. I think people are either naive or they're in a state of denial. I mean, these things are happening, but people think it's not going to happen to me, and they're just trying to push it out of their consciousness. It's happening to somebody else out there, but you're going to be next in line. It's going to happen to you as well, because this government has such a need for money. I mean, they're so corrupt, and they're living these Hollywood lifestyles. I don't know whether you know Johannesburg much, but or the Gauteng area. But if you see the number of kind of Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Rolls Royces, Bentleys and stuff on the roads, and the huge houses, and people just buy big houses and they tear them down and they build a bigger one and so on. And all of that money has to come from somewhere. And it's not coming from productive business or good investments or tech startups or anything like that. It's coming from the government, and the government has such a need for income, and they're out to get it. I mean, there's also, I mean, the revenue service also has laws like that where they can just lay claim to your bank account. And I've heard of lots of people losing money like that, where the revenue service just comes along and withdraws all the cash in a small business account, or even so a friend of mine told me he's minister, he's pastor, out somewhere in the country. He suddenly lost all the money in his account. He doesn't even, and they don't even tell him who he should talk to at the revenue service about that. So it's going on everywhere, and every year the government announces record revenues. We're now over 2 trillion rand of government revenue, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. But where is it coming from? It's actually bleeding the country dry. It's either through taxes or through these asset forfeitures that are going on.
Well, the rent seeking is it's unbelievable. The corruption is beyond comparison. The patronage network is clear and obvious. The stats that purportedly just 44 people are the major beneficiaries of all of the BEE deals over the past decade or so is so easily believable because we can see it before our eyes. But let me ask this question, has there been a tangible impact on your organization? Obviously, you probably were looking to pay bills.
I mean, it's been absolutely devastating. I mean, everything came to a halt because we had what we call here a debit order system, where all of our members, paid a monthly donation, which was sort of collected by the bank from their accounts, and they closed our bank account. We lost all our capital and cash. I mean, we just had to, we practically came to a standstill. So it's been, and on me personally as well, it's been, all of our income's gone. I mean, we now have to hustle for money here and there. I'm trying to do translations for people in Europe and so on. But yeah, when you were talking about Starlink as well, what's happening in South Africa is that a lot of people in the cities are, because they cannot find work because of all these very stringent DEI laws, they're actually working online for companies overseas in Europe, US, or Australia. But for that, you actually need a good internet connection. So the moment, if Starlink had to come to South Africa, everybody in the countryside would also be able to have access maybe to foreign employment and communication and so on. And I think they don't want that. They want to keep people poor. They want to impoverish us. And therefore, they realize that, Starlink would represent such freedom for us in giving everybody in South Africa, even on the farms, in the tiniest hamlet and so on, access to high-speed internet. That's why they want to stop it. And probably also, some of the atrocities happening out on the farms, the farm murders and that sort of thing, would actually get out a lot more easily because there would be high-speed internet and videos and whatever. Whereas now people have to use their cell phones, and sometimes, the speed is slow and so on. So they can't, it has less of an impact that it actually should have on the public opinion here and overseas. So I really think that, Americans should, the Trump administration is offering, asylum to Afrikaners. They've now upped the quota to something like 17,000 people per year. But essentially, this is our country. We want to stay here, but we just want we want a fair deal, and we want due process. So I think people should our issues should be taken up internationally, and US politicians should, and congressmen should start asking questions about these asset forfeitures and the corruption and everything else that's going on in South Africa. I mean, it's just completely scandalous that all of this should be allowed, and that they should get away with this. And at the same time, there's still AGOA, and there's still, the European Union is still donating development aid to South Africa and that sort of thing. At least the US aid is no longer pumping in money into South Africa, because a lot of that money went to left-wing NGOs who were using it for propaganda purposes. They weren't using it for development or for economic growth or anything like that. They were using it for propaganda purposes.
But whether they used it for propaganda purposes or not, the government of South Africa was alleviated from the responsibility of taking care of its population. For the $8.1 billion we poured in HIV programs, they didn't have to spend that money, which allowed them to pilfer money and take and use it elsewhere. There's definitely an impact there. As far as the aid, it's not just that. The World Bank just gave South Africa another $1.4 billion just a couple of months ago. It just never ends. It's shocking how the government can run around and scream vaccine apartheid and unfair practices, yada, yada, yada. But the unfair practices are stemming from Pretoria and from Matuli House, not from this side of the Atlantic. And quite frankly, the aid should have been cut off a long time ago, even though I don't have a problem with some of it. But the point here is that this has been going on for a very long time. And the world really doesn't seem to pay attention. The world is stuck in this vision of April 27th of 1994 in Rainbow Nation, the Rainbow Nazi. It's utter poppycock. There's clearly an effort here to punish people, as Marco Rubio said, in act of racial revenge. And of course, all the bigwigs in the ANC, Ronnie Lamola, little Ronnie, and Gwede Mantashe, big Gwede, and then of course Cyril Ramaphosa and Fikile Mbula, all scoffing at the fact that Donald Trump was correct. But Trump said bad things are happening in South Africa. I don't know how anyone who is objective can dispute that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, bad things are happening here, either in the form of the vicious violence and the crime and mayhem. Somebody I know has just been hijacked, on the off ramp of a highway just close by here. We sometimes on the neighborhood WhatsApp group, we get messages that there are car hijackings taking place outside a shopping center and things like that. There's that going on, and then there's huge corruption, and there are so many commissions of inquiry into that. I mean, the facts fill volumes, millions and millions of pages. There are millions and millions of pages of sworn evidence about the corruption, and nothing ever happens about that. Nobody is ever charged. Everything is just glossed over, and the so-called criminal justice system. The system works to take your money away, but it doesn't work to stop crime and corruption and make government honest and accountable. For that, it's just completely dysfunctional.
Well, I don't want people to think, and I've already talked about it a couple of times, I want people to think that this is strictly a South African problem. As I've said, we have states in America that have asset forfeiture laws, and also the federal government has that when it comes to the drug trade. But we have issues here on this side where the misbehavior of government. We had, of course, famously banks debank the former president of the United States under spurious grounds over a bogus narrative about an insurrection where that I attended as a journalist, there was no insurrection. That's utter nonsense. And if they think that a couple hundred people walking in the Capitol building endangers the functioning of our government, then they really don't understand how our government runs. Having served in the government at the highest levels, I am aware of continuity of government and of all the ways that this government will continue regardless of what happens in the Capitol building or the White House. It's we have abuses on this side as well. It's shocking. And what's sad to me, Dan, is that we, the people of the polity, form governments to represent our collective needs. And what happens is that over time, they become these leviathans that dictate to us. Even so-called democracies, liberal democracies, dictate to us how our life will be. I don't know many Germans that wanted their country flooded by 12 million foreign people who refused to speak German, who get Kindergeld for their 9 children, and who sexually molest their daughters at Schwimmbads and Hallenbads. I don't recall any Germans I know, and I know a lot of Germans. I don't know too many Brits that signed up for the invasion. They were okay with the Windrush generation coming because of shortage of labor, and didn't have a major issue with people from South Asia coming for a while. But now it's out of control. And certainly the Irish didn't sign up to have 1/3 of their population be foreign nationals who run around and attack the Irish in the streets of Dublin and Limerick. It's incredibly frustrating how governments try to rule us. Once upon a time we were all ruled by monarchs and tyrants. Now bureaucracies are the tyrants, and these political systems are supposed to be liberal democracies are a real problem. And even here in America, we have abuses, and people need to be vigilant. You need to be aware of what these governments can do to you. And your case shows that you could be completely caught off guard. You had no idea that following the law and having your transactions tracked by the bank and doing them legitimately would lead to your money being seized.
Yes, exactly. I cannot agree with you more. I was particularly shocked by the whole Ashley Babbitt affair, how she could be killed there in the Capitol for nothing. I mean, she was just liquidated right there and then. And now in the UK, you've had this case of Henry Novak, who was, he was stabbed by a criminal, somebody with a criminal record. And instead of arresting the murderer or his attacker, the perpetrator, the police actually handcuffed him, and he bled out on the sidewalk, from his stab wounds. While the police was saying to him, "Yeah, I don't think you've been stabbed, mate." I mean, that sort of thing. It's absolutely shocking. I don't think there's been a time in the modern era when we've seen so many abuses by governments and by bureaucracies and by the police services, security forces and so on. So it's a real worldwide problem. And people are talking about the South Africanization of the Western world. And I can see that happening. I mean, even in the Netherlands, they had, over the past few years, they had all these protests by farmers because the government is actually, in certain areas, they're actually banning farming. It's just absolutely mad, insane. And so there's a pattern to all of this.
Oh, there is. And for years, the European Union, bureaucrats in Brussels have dictated to farmers in Ireland, in Germany, to fishermen in Scotland and in Denmark, what they can catch, when they can catch it, what they can grow, what they can't grow. And it perverts the entire system. And it makes food very expensive, unnecessarily so, because of their system of subsidies they use and just, deciding who the winners and losers are. It's pretty disturbing what governments do to people. And that's just an example of it. It's here in the U.S., you talk about the Ashley Babbitt thing. I don't have a lot of empathy for Ashley Babbitt. She shouldn't have died. But that whole story has a whole different angle. And that's that to this day, the government has not admitted to who the officer was who murdered her, who overreacted in the heat of the moment and fired his weapon. And we only know because he outed himself. He's a black man, and that's why they covered it up. A black man murdered a white veteran who had no business in the building. She was trespassing, but she was not a threat. In fact, was not putting his life in jeopardy. And what we know about this officer is he also is a reckless, useless piece of crap because he's left his firearm unattended on the sink in the congressional building, walking out of the building, leaving his firearm behind when he washed his hands. The guy should never have been an agent working for the Capitol Police. And so the only reason we know about it is because he outed himself. Meanwhile, just a day or two after that January 6th event took place, there was an effort by a black man in a bucky to ram through the barrier at the Capitol building, and he was shot by a white police officer who saved the life of a black police officer that was nearly run over, and he shot this guy. They left that part of the story out. They reported that a white Capitol police officer shot and killed a black man. Well, they eventually had to admit that he was trying to ram through the barrier, but they didn't say that he saved the life of a black man. It's similar to, the way the press doesn't report things, and they're part of this. They're complicit in this as well. I went to Rustenburg in 2022, and then I went to Zeerust. And in Zeerust, I spoke to farmers. About 140 commercial farmers came to my speech up there, and most of them speak English in self-defense, so I had to go slow as I could with my English because I'm a little too fast for people. But we spoke, and then a couple days after I left there, I got tragic news that one of the farmers I met, who'd been a former police officer, had been killed in a farm attack. Not on the farm, but in response. He was part of the response team out that night. They went out, and they grew impatient. They had them trapped between the farm and then these guys come in and respond. They had them trapped on a road. The brush was too thick for the bucky to get off the road, so they had them trapped. And eventually they lost patience. They came in and they opened up fire. A round went under the vest, and this former police officer bled out in about 5 minutes. The only journalist in the world who reported the circumstances of that event was me. And the reason is because the white farmers responded to an attack on a black Tswana farmer. His farm was attacked. He gave his life to protect a black man, and the media never covered that. This is all part of just this shameful conduct of governments and the media covering up things and covering up the truth when it doesn't fit their narrative. What they want to say is that in South Africa in particular, Afrikaners are evil. They're responsible for all the bad things happening in South Africa. Of course, we know Jan van Riebeck and apartheid are responsible for all the ANC's failures. And so they're going to do what they want, and they're going to try to exterminate you culturally. Now, I think that's a lot to say, but I just had to get that out there.
Yeah, that's a very interesting incident that you're relating there. I wasn't even aware of that. But, also another issue that, that I also became aware of, somebody actually sent me a whole manuscript about that, is that the government is also using the bankruptcy laws against farmers. Because South Africa has got, I've looked at the US bankruptcy laws, and your laws are actually quite fair. But in South Africa, our bankruptcy law comes from the 1930s. It's completely, it's sort of like a totalitarian thing where if you're suspected of being, if you owe somebody 100 Rand, which is like $6, okay, then you haven't paid it, then you can be declared bankrupt. And that's a so-called act of insolvency, and they can actually, they place you are considered like an insane person or a minor. You lose all control over your estate, over your bank accounts, over everything, and an administrator steps in, and they just start dealing in your assets, pillaging it, selling all your livestock, taking your farm. And it's happened to a lot of farmers here. And there's one particular case, a guy called Karel van der Merwe, who had, dozens of farms and with lots and lots of livestock in the Northern Cape. And they completely ruined him by means of the bankruptcy laws. And there was a lot of corruption involved in it as well. And there's actually corruption in the system too. And these bankruptcy laws from the 1930s, the Insolvency Act, that's another hugely dangerous piece of legislation in South Africa, on a par with Exchange Control and Regulation 22B.
Well, you're correct about the bankruptcy laws being much fairer. I don't want to say generous, fair in the United States, and it varies from state to state. But one of the interesting aspects of bankruptcy law in one state in particular, Florida, is the reason why so many people who have wealth have homes in Florida. I don't know if you know what that is, but in Florida, if you declare bankruptcy and all your assets are sold off, they cannot take your primary residence. They cannot take your home. If you have a home in Florida, They cannot take it, regardless. Even if you have a $10 million home and you're paying a loan off on it and you can't pay it off, they can't take it. They cannot seize your home because they can't make you homeless. But that's an exception. Other states, they can take your home, they sell it, and use the proceeds to liquidate your debt. But in Florida, they can't do it. That's why so many wealthy people have homes in Florida.
But I think even in some states, they can sell your home, but a certain portion of the equity in your home remains yours. I think in New York State, it's something like $400 and something thousand. So at least, you keep something of your assets. But in South Africa, mentioning that property and your homes and so on, at least one of the banks in Johannesburg, FNB, and a bunch of lawyers from Werksmans, they're actually specializing in going after people's properties by, and by declaring them bankrupt. They just come along, and because there's some protection for your primary residence in South Africa. It's not a lot, but the bank has to kind of get special permission to declare your, what do you call it, to foreclose on your house and kick you out on the street and that sort of thing. But they're circumventing that through the bankruptcy law, and they're just going after declaring people insolvent left, right, and center. So that's awful. It's really awful in our society that not only is government corrupt, not only is there a lot of violence and crime and so on, but there are these unscrupulous lawyers and certain institutions that are actually cashing in on this whole system and enriching themselves, and by taking advantage of the disorder in our country.
Well, there's always, in every crisis, winners. Even when there are many losers, there's always someone who profits from war. There's always someone who profits from disease. Look at the people who made billions and trillions off of the PPE fraud and scams during the scamdemic took place a couple years ago. There's always somebody making money. But, we talked a bit about in this conversation about how things are misleading. One of the things that is often talked about in South Africa is, of course, the issue of farm murders. Even had the illustrious Professor Mel Fillon back from being deported from America talking on Jacaranda FM this week and telling us about how Donald Trump is not the friend of Afrikaners and talking about how farm murders are just crime. I'm sure she really doesn't know much about farm murders, excuse me. But Professor Mel there, of course, telling us her genius, deep, insightful background and knowledge about the farm murder situation. I think I'd probably listen to Johnny Steinberg before I listen to Mel. But anyway, we know, for instance, that these crimes are covered up. And I have the proof of it, and I exposed it last year when my friend's father-in-law in his 70s and his wife were assaulted on their farm near Brits. The first night, they poisoned their dogs, so they lost their early alert system. Then the next night, they stole the front wheel on one side and the back wheel on the other side of their bakkie so they couldn't escape. Then the third night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, they came in. He had just had a hip replacement, so he's confined to a wheelchair. They tied him up, and then they tied her up. He just begged that they not rape her and kill them. And then they tortured him for hours, and there was nothing to take. I think they took like a cell phone and, maybe a television. That was about it. And of course, everyone claims that these are foreign nationals, but they were all Tswana. They had the accent from the area. People recognized that accent in Tswana. And the police reported it as a house robbery. I exposed that crime, and I'm not very popular with the police commander in the Brits area right now, I can tell you that, because he had to come out and apologize because it was publicly disclosed. But the media in South Africa have refused to cover the story and admit that the police covered this up. And this is just but one of the hundreds of cases of farm assaults and attacks and home invasions around the country that are listed as robberies when they're meant to terrorize, to torture, and to frighten people off the land. That's exactly what happened in Brits. They're no longer on the farm, and now it's in disuse.
Yes, you're right. It is a form of institutionalized terrorism, really. And the state, you must recall a few years ago when, Samantha Power was in one of the government, he was in government in the US. She wrote some books about genocides in other parts of the world, and this notion that the duty to protect the citizenry by governments, and our government is not protecting us at all. The police are not protecting us. If these private security services didn't exist, all of us would have been probably killed or destitute, or there would have been complete chaos because the police are just turning a blind eye all the time. So South Africa, more than ever before in its history, it needs attention. It needs the spotlight shined on the country, because otherwise I don't see how we're going to overcome these problems that are plaguing us at the moment. And, the politicians, I don't have that much faith in them. There are sort of municipal elections quite soon this year, in a few months' time. But, during these sort of election periods, then they're all out there on the TV and in social media, coming up for the citizenry. But after the election, all of that just disappears again, and the parliament is just one big talk shop. There are so many issues that haven't been resolved in years and in decades. And talking about all these, these laws that are incomplete, that are completely contrary to the current constitution, like this Insolvency Act, like this Section 22B of the Exchange Control Regulations. All of that, it's never taken up in Parliament. Apparently there was some sort of attempt some years ago to, I spoke to a woman once who was part of a committee or something looking at the Insolvency Act, but nothing has happened. We're just stuck with all of this archaic and unjust legislation that are being used against us by this government.
Indeed. What I'd have to say is that so many aspects of recent laws passed are in clear violation of South Africa's constitution, promulgated, enacted, and put in motion by a majority black government in post-apartheid South Africa. The people who run the country are the ones responsible for this constitution, and that constitution has protections for confiscation of property, expropriation. You must give just and equitable compensation, which must be agreed to by both parties. Yet the Expropriation Without Compensation Act clearly violates Section 25 of the Constitution. Bella clearly violates the section of the Constitution which guarantees cultural autonomy. And the list goes on and on and on and on. Equal treatment under the law is violated with the Employment Equity Act. That's not equal treatment. These things are all in contradiction. Dan, we've got kind of far afield of the topic that you came on to talk about, which is fine because it's been a fascinating discussion. We've talked an awful lot about this asset seizure, which a lot of people don't realize and what's happening in your organization. But we didn't really get a chance, and if you'd like to spend a few moments talking about this, your organization, what are you doing now? Are you solvent? Were you able to open a new bank account? Do you have to bank in the Jersey Islands? What's going on, and how can people contribute?
Yeah, I'm actually contemplating moving everything offshore and starting a new nonprofit in another country, and so that we'll be safer. I did actually open another bank account, but there's absolutely nothing. It's just costing me bank fees at the moment because there's no revenue coming through there. We've got another small outfit, it's a kind of a for-profit entity where we publish books and do translations from European languages into Afrikaans. And so that's keeping us busy. So we're sort of in survival mode, I would say, at the moment. And then we're going to have to fight this whole thing in court. But, as I told you, given the sort of contradictions in the court system and these judges, not being, they were the one giving a judgment completely diametrically opposed to the other one. It's like flipping a coin. So you don't really know what the outcome would be. And unfortunately, as you go higher up to the appeal courts and the constitutional court, it's also politicized that, justice is hard to come by in South Africa. So, that's the situation we find ourselves in. It's most unfortunate. And, I've lost a lot of personal money and effort in this process as well. So if people want to support us, they can just contact me on any of our social media. I'm on X and Facebook and so on. And we've also, our websites were also hacked, and we're trying to get them back online. So there's not, but they can find me on social media, and we've got PayPal and Stripe and whatever, and also on YouTube. We've got a YouTube channel, Pro TV, and there are also some details on there where people can make contact with us.
Well, it is quite a disturbing situation when people can just take things. So I just want to make it clear, in case people are tuning in now, your assets were seized from Prague, and we're talking 4.2 million rand 3 years ago, and now they've just taken them all together. They froze them 3 years ago. Now they've taken them. You have not been accused of any malfeasance or criminal act. You have not been charged with any criminal act, and you've not been convicted of any criminal act. Yet your organization is now destitute, or at least bereft of funds that were legitimately placed in that bank account. Have I gotten anything wrong there?
No. You haven't got anything wrong. That's exactly the situation that you're in.
Wow.
If you look at how criminals get treated in South Africa, I saw there's a constitutional court case where a black guy confessed to a murder, and then he was convicted and given a life sentence. But then he appealed, and he said that during his confession, his rights were not read to him. And there's also a section of the Constitution that guarantees against self-incrimination, and that he incriminated himself by doing the confession. And he was let out. The Constitutional Court let him off the hook. Guy had committed a murder, who killed another human being, but I haven't got the same rights. That's how it goes. It's like a two-tier system in South Africa.
Well, there are definitely two tiers of justice around the world, particularly if it comes to white majority in America, or white minority in South Africa, white majority in the UK. Two layers of justice. People losing their mind over Carmela Anthony, who murdered another human being in full view of dozens of witnesses, many of them black, testimony given, and people trying to claim it was a race-based conviction for this guy. And all he got was 35 years instead of life or the death penalty. He couldn't get the death penalty because I think he was 17 at the time. But people always want to turn this into something it's not. Dan, thanks for sharing where people can find you. Any final thoughts or any concerns or warnings you might want to have for people just to watch out for themselves before we wrap up?
Yes, I think people have to be very careful about, about having large amounts of money in their bank accounts, and you should rather, you should rather keep it in jurisdictions where it's safe. Somebody once told me that, there's only one country in the world where they cannot really take the money in your account without a court order, and that's Switzerland. So, but of course, in the US, it's very, the whole issue of Switzerland is very sensitive, and the Swiss banks, due to all the fines they've had in the past from the US government, they're not very keen on taking on US accounts and so on. But we don't really have that problem in South Africa. So and otherwise, it's also better to have hard assets like property, although then they can use the bankruptcy law against you and so on. So you're not winning on that one either. So yes, but people just have to, I think you have to be very careful and not put all your eggs into one basket. Make sure that you've got lots of bank accounts and in lots of jurisdictions, and that way you can play it safe.
Well, Dan, I don't have lots of money, but I do have lots of bank accounts in multiple jurisdictions. and I do spread what little wealth I have around in the form of tangible assets and a little bit of cash here and there, but there isn't much of it. But no, I certainly appreciate that standpoint, because I know how that works. And you're correct about Switzerland. Switzerland used to be a locked, tight vault, but there was so much criminal activity that the Swiss finally caved. But if your money's legitimate, the Swiss are normally going to protect you. That's been the norm in the past, in the recent past. But if there's any dodgy aspect to it, they're going to go after you. And if you put your money in the Cayman Islands, it might be safe, but it automatically makes you look like you're a troublemaker because people who put money in the Cayman Islands typically are criminals. So that's already one. The Jersey banks are gone. Austria used to be a safe place to put it, but that's not anymore. The bottom line is governments are overspending money, and they're all looking for ways to take your resources. So it's kind of a shame. Dan, I want to thank you for coming on. Appreciate you sharing your time with me. If you want to come back at some time, talk about another issue, you're welcome to do that. And I'm going to wish you, well, it's almost the weekend. It's Thursday, so I wish you can you say bye Navi? Can you say that? Is that the right way to say that?
Ja, lekker naweek. You can say lekker naweek of aangename naweek. Actually, I'm flying to Brussels tomorrow, so I'm going to spend the weekend in Belgium, and about another 2 weeks or so. So I've got quite a hectic period ahead of me. So, but it's been really nice talking.
Do me a favor, say hello to Ursula von der Leyen for me.
Yes, well, I wouldn't go too close to her. Bodyguards might,
Well, if you get too close, you might catch a little wokeism.
Yes, exactly. But I'll we're on our side of the political spectrum. I'll certainly give your regards to various people I know over there. Yes, and thank you very much for putting me on and for this excellent conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure. It was lekker, and you're welcome back anytime. Just let me know, okay?
I'll do that. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
All right, there you go, folks. That's Dr. Dan Rodt talking to us about the asset forfeiture stuff that happened to him and could happen to you. I'm going to put him in the waiting room so I can wrap up. Okay, there we go. All right, well, that's it. Thanks to my guest, Dan Rodt, for coming on. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it fascinating. I know I did. And I'll catch you right here in about 12 minutes for the news. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll be right back with the news as soon as this thing ends. Top of the hour. Cheers, everybody.